Marshall Harrison was one of the very first Cracking the Code interviews that I did. Actually, the second interview after Rusty Cooley. I had met Rusty a number of times while I was developing this slow motion camera system. And when I finally got the first fully functional version of the camera ready, and I was actually the day before I was going to get on a plane and go down to Houston and meet Rusty again, I had stumbled across Marshall's website, and I realized only at that point that they both lived in Houston. And I sent him an email, he got right back, and he said, sure, come on over, which was quite fortuitous because now I had two amazing players to meet when I went down there. Both insanely virtuosic, full of incredible ideas, and very different in style and execution. Marshall's style is, of course, this very grand, cascading, flowing style where interesting patterns and chord colors move through different octaves. And one of the first things you notice about this is how effortless it all looks. There's really not a lot of movement going on. It doesn't look like he's trying very hard to make this happen. And one of the reasons for this, of course, is sweeping. Sweeping is integral to Marshall's style, not just for arpeggiated sequences, but really for any sequence where you need to move across the strings from one string to another, and you can do so with a single pick stroke. This is a choice that Marshall talks very openly about in the interview. We talk about watching intense rock and taking some of those sequences and trying to reinterpret them as sweeping.
Intense rock 1.
Did you,
but I swept it all.
Did you play any of that? Oh, you did? Like... And it's clear that he's built a whole worldview around using sweeping as a device for getting efficiently from one string to another. But it's not just efficiency, it's also a way of enabling things that would be really prohibitively difficult with alternate picking. In fact, it's not so much that sweeping is easy, it's that trying to do this kind of playing with pure alternate picking is really, really difficult if you're not aware of two-way Pickslanting. In fact, if you think of the greatest alternate pickers ever, you get people like John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, even Tal Farlow, as inventive as he was, you really don't hear the level of speed and fluency with this type of playing that you do in the later sweep era players like Gambale. It is simply much, much easier to create unusual and interesting patterns that use arbitrary numbers of notes per string. When you remove that burden of having to constantly get over the top of the string using alternate picking, then get back into the strings, maintain your accuracy, chunking while you're doing all that, all of this stuff becomes much, much more approachable when you use sweeping. So I love sweeping, if only for that reason, that it enables musical creativity to a degree that would really be pretty impossible otherwise. The other thing that sweeping does is it leads you down the path to Pickslanting. The strings naturally push the pick into a pick-slanted orientation in the direction of the movement of the sweep. We talked about this in Season 2, Episode 2 of Cracking the Code, the Yngwie street sweeping scene where he's pushing over the garage spikes. In the Yngwie and the Eric Johnson system, because they're downward pick-slanters, they tend to sweep in the ascending direction. But in the world of two-way pick-slanting, like Frank Gambale and, of course, later Jason Becker and all of these guys, the two-way pick-slanting movement is a part and parcel of the sweep experience. In fact, if you just hold the pick loosely and push it through the strings in either direction without thinking about pickslanting at all, you will naturally be doing the sort of mysterious black magic of two-way pickslanting. This is the same movement. It doesn't matter that these are swept passages versus alternate picking passages. Pickslanting is very simply an orientation. It's the pick pointing in a particular direction. And if you look at the close-up footage in the interview, you can see very clearly Marshall is absolutely a two-way pickslanter. This was obvious to me sitting a few feet away from him, watching him play these lines. It's even more obvious under the camera. And the takeaway here, if we get back to that effortlessness again, is that you can see that whether he's using downward pickslanting or upward pickslanting, whether he's sweeping in the ascending direction or descending direction, whether he's using alternate picking, his hand position basically never changes. And this is important because now that we know what Pickslanting is, there is this tendency to imagine that we would have a natural inclination one way or another, that I am naturally a downward Pickslanter or I'm naturally an upward Pickslanter. And the implication there is that it would be difficult somehow for me to learn the opposite Pickslant, that I'm going to have to relearn intangible aspects of my technique, like muting, for example, that once I make this switch, it's going to be such a dramatic change that I have to re-engineer everything I've done. And it's very clear looking at Marshall's technique that this is simply not the case. The hand position for both of these orientations is so incredibly close that there's really no difference between the two. The hand is basically placed flat on the strings there, and the minimal, really the most minimal amount of Pickslant is used to get over the string or to make sweeping easier in the direction that he's moving. Now, in my own playing, I tend to use bigger of everything. I use more aggressive downward Pickslanting, more edge picking, bigger pick strokes, bigger Pickslanting movements. And this is evident in one of the first lessons that we put up last year was the Steve Vai Crossroads lesson. And there's a section in there where I play a 3-note per string scale across all 6 strings using two-way Pickslanting with what I consider my standard rock technique. And when we put this up there, we got comments under the video. Viewers noticed the forearm movements. They said, we see that rolling movement you're doing there with the hand. What is that? What's happening there? Well, of course, now we know that's two-way Pickslanting. It's much more visible when I do it here because, again, everything is bigger. If you're going to use a bigger movement in the downward direction, then to get to upward Pickslanting, that movement flattening out the wrist and rolling the hand back there is going to be more visible. The whole system is just dilated larger, and you get a bigger sound as a result of this. And I use it when I want that sound. But the important point here is that at all times, I'm still basically maintaining the same orientation. My hand is still touching the bridge. I still have muting capabilities in both directions. They're not dramatically different.